Hey everybody, welcome to the Integration Toolbox. I hope that is what you're here to watch today because that is what I'm here to present. Today we're going to be talking about choosing the right tool for your integration job. If we haven't met yet, my name is Bryony Mackey. You might know me as Bree. I'm a solution architect here with the Quickbase team. I've been with Quickbase at this point for about 3 years. Prior to that, I ran Quickbase, Salesforce, and about 33 other tangential systems for a large financial services company for over a decade. A lot of people sometimes ask me what is the coolest thing that I built on Quickbase, and I would have to say that it's probably at this point my career. As always, don't forget to rate this session. We love your feedback. We want your feedback. We use it to make Empower better for you and more useful. And it also helps me become a better presenter and present better topics for you. So today, the key takeaways that I want you to gain is I want you to be able to differentiate between the available integration tools that Quickbase offers, because when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I want you to be able to pick the right tool for your needs, and I want you to be able to assess the tools. And also know what resources are available to you, because nobody expects you to memorize all of this stuff. I certainly don't have it all memorized, and I have been building on Quickbase since, oh my gosh, 2007. So don't think that you have to know everything. We just want you armed with everything you need to choose the right tool. So a little rundown of what we're going to cover. We're going to talk about why are we here today, obviously integration, but we're going to go over the available tools. We're going to do a pipelines deep dive of some of the included channels that you may not have checked out yet. We'll do a little bit of a recap, and then as always, we're going to have time for Q&A at the end. While this is a recorded session, some of my cohorts and I are lurking in the chat to answer your questions throughout, so don't be afraid to throw out a question as we're going. So why are we here today? I mean, you know, not metaphorically, of course, that could take up the whole hour, but we want to talk about tools because just because a tool can do a job doesn't mean it should do a job, right? I mean, if Thor had a shovel, he could probably still command the thunder and lightning, but it probably wouldn't have the same effect as his hammer or his axe. You know, I've used a wrench to hammer a nail. It did the job, but it didn't do it particularly well. And also a reason we're here is that 100% of you either already have or in the future, you're going to need integration with your Quickbase. Because the most important thing that your company has is its data, and your data cannot live in a silo. And it's likely that you don't use Quickbase for all of your data management needs. You probably have other systems. You might have Salesforce, you might have ServiceNow, you might have Jira. And you need to connect that data so that everybody has the information that they need. So a quick poll here, which Avengers tool is the strongest? So throw your vote into the chat. Is it number 1, Mjolnir or Thor? Number 2, Iron Man suits? Number 3, Taser batons, Black Widow? Number 4, Black Panthers. I guess technically he has suits because Shuri was making some extras. Number 5, Falcon's wings. Number 6, Bucky Barnes' arm. I did not get a picture of the new Vibranium arm. Sorry about that. Number 7, Hawkeye's bow and arrows, or number 8, Captain America's shield. We'll give you a moment to make your decision. All right, and the answer is you are all wrong because it is Vision's Mind Stone. So if you chose Vision's Mind Stone, you are correct. If, like one of my coworkers, you chose Wolverine's adamantium skeleton, we can't be friends anymore because he's not an Avenger. Moving on. Let's look at some of our available tools that we have. So you're probably all familiar with our connected tables or our sync functionality. This was introduced quite a few years ago. It offers a one-way sync. The data is non-editable once it arrives into Quickbase. It's very low complexity though. It really evened the playing field for the no-code builders or the low-code builders. Next up is our OG of integration, and that is our API. Our XML API has been around for a very long time, at least since 2007. And it offers a two-way sync. It's a little bit higher complexity. There's a little more of a learning curve. And then we also have just introduced our new RESTful JSON API. Finally, the new kid on the street is pipelines. Pipelines offers you a way to transform your data. You can have a two-way sync between systems or between Quickbase applications. There's intuitive channels for you to use. We have over 30 channels currently. And pipelines can be low to high complexity. It again kind of evens that playing field where your advanced developers can build advanced pipelines, but even your beginner builders can, build a pipeline between Quickbase and Salesforce. So a bit more on our connected tables. If you've never used these, it allows you to get data from an external system and bring it into Quickbase. So we connect to Salesforce, Zuora, NetSuite. You can do CSV files from Box and Dropbox. You can get data from another Quickbase app, and you can also create what's kind of called the Quickbase admin console, where that allows you to sync in user data and application data and access data. So you can kind of manage your users. And maybe you have people who are not realm administrators and you want to be able to have them look through your user list. This can help you out with that because it allows you to keep your data with a source of truth, and you're just really sharing the data over to Quickbase for consumption. Now, connected tables are great in certain circumstances. However, more than once, I've witnessed a client that syncs in data from somewhere, and then they do a table-to-table import into another table so that they can actually edit the data and manipulate it. So while that works, and I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but then they're kind of left with these two tables that are almost identical, and it seems a little superfluous, right? We want our applications to be kind of lean and mean, and when the data comes in, we want it there and we want to manipulate it there. We don't want to have two tables. So it still does have its place. If you want to keep the data integrity there, you don't want to manipulate it at all, then sync tables is a good integration point for you. Next up, we have the API. Now, if you are not familiar with APIs, please don't feel that this is too advanced for you. Even if you didn't know what it stands for, now you do. It's Application Programming Interface. So I'll tell you what, when I started building on Quickbase, I did not have an IT background. I didn't even have an engineering background. I had been a business analyst, was kind of the closest thing that I had done. And I kind of took over IT desktop management, server and telephony management for my last company, and quickly realized that I needed a IT ticketing system to really sort out my work and be able to triage things, right? So I had sat down and I built my first Quickbase app. That app was actually just retired about 2 years ago at the company. So that just goes to show you kind of the power of Quickbase. But more to the point, I didn't know what an API was before I started building in Quickbase. And it was actually the XML API guide that taught me how to use APIs and taught me what they were. And that knowledge carried me forward to when I started developing in Salesforce. I understood what an API was. I understood what they could do and what I could do with them. So don't let the API intimidate you by any means. I know a lot of people kind of look at it and they're like, wait a minute, this is supposed to be low code. This is supposed to be no code. Okay, it can be. It absolutely can be. But don't you want to take your app up to that next level? I think that you do. So go ahead, play with the API. Get yourself a developer account and learn how to make these calls. You can download a really cool open source program called Postman that will allow you to build these API calls, see the results, and see all the payloads and stuff like that. And you're going to learn, and you're not going to be so intimidated anymore. And last, we've got pipelines, which I'm sure you've all kind of dabbled with. This was, a really big release for us. It was a big deal, kind of breaking into that integration as a service market. Pipelines allows you to connect those disparate systems that, possibly we don't have a sync for, or, you're just not sure about their API or things like that. You can include conditions on your call. You can put in filters. You can transform your data using Jinja within your pipeline to make changes. Similar to automations, which I'm sure you've all heard, automations are being phased out over the next couple of years. Some people are really upset. I'm not, because pipelines is going to answer all the questions that you had that were answered by automations initially. Similar to automations, you're going to be able to, schedule your updates, trigger on actions, on add, on edit, those types of things. And probably the most important thing about pipelines is that it doesn't have to involve Quickbase. So automations were only Quickbase to Quickbase, right? You were pretty limited. You could not have an automation that sent data to Salesforce. But with pipelines, you can build a pipeline between your ServiceNow instance and your Salesforce org. It doesn't have to have Quickbase. So now kind of this world has opened up where maybe you couldn't make those connections before because of what was offered in those external systems, but with pipelines, now you can. So speaking of pipelines, we want to do a little bit more of a deep dive. Even if you haven't built a pipeline yet, or you built one maybe that doesn't work, is what I've heard a lot. Don't be afraid. We're going to talk about these, and I want you all to stick around. But real quick, we're going to go over this anatomy of a pipeline, just in case you haven't seen them before. So on the left-hand side, when the dark blue dotted line, we have the entire pipeline itself. So this is the overall workflow that encompasses the individual pipes or steps. And those are indicated with the yellow dotted or dashed line. So a step is the individual building block that does a thing. So you could have a pipeline that, as a record is added, you go to another table, you delete a record, and then you go to another table and you add a record. So that's the entire pipeline. And the individual steps are those pipes that are doing individual actions. In the right-hand pane with the light blue dashed line, these are the channels that are available. So these are all of the third-party services or the included channels that we're going to talk about in a little bit. These are all the channels that you can choose from. Now, your view may not look like this because your Realm admin may not have turned those pipelines on for you. So you need to go talk to your Realm admin if there's a specific channel that you need other than Quickbase. So let's say you need to connect to Slack or ServiceNow. You can talk to them. They can help you get it turned on. If you have any other issues, like always, contact your CSM or our care team. So let's talk about included channels. You may have noticed that if you got into pipelines, you may have Quickbase, and then there are about 6 other channels, excuse me, 6 other channels with purple icons that are already on. So these are included channels. And what that means is we don't charge you for that channel. It doesn't count against your entitlements. It does count for step run entitlements on certain licenses and certain payment plans, I think. Talk to your AE. I'm definitely not the plan specialist here. So what is the point of these channels? The point is that while we have 30 channels, and that's a lot of channels so far, we still have people coming in and saying, look, you don't have a channel for what I want to integrate with. I want to, connect to Bree CRM over here, and you don't have a channel for that. So the answer to that is these included channels. If that external system has an API, then we can use these channels to make the calls that you need. Now, we're just going to do a deep dive on 3 of them because otherwise I would completely run out of time. I still might because I get a little excited about these. But real quickly, so there is a bucket channel. The bucket channel kind of acts like almost a mini temporary database where you can create buckets of data for use later on in your pipeline or even across pipelines. The clock channel, which I'll be honest, the first time I saw it, I'm like, why do I need to inject time into my pipeline? But if you think about the clock more of a timer, what you can do is you can actually pause a pipeline for a set amount of time. So if you have an SLA for a record to be updated or something along those lines, you can trigger a pipeline. Maybe when the record is created, you can pause the pipeline for 30 minutes. And then the pipeline can go, check and see if a thing was done on that particular record. And if it was, then do another thing. If it wasn't, do another thing. So that's kind of a cool use case for clock. The last one that we're not really going to get into today is the text channel. And the text channel allows you to examine bulk text with regex. If you're not familiar with regex, don't feel bad. It's definitely not my forte either. I'm not a huge fan, but just know that if you are good at regex, you can use that text channel to kind of iterate over text payloads that are returned by other channels. But what we are going to talk about today are the CSV handler, the JSON handler, and the Webhooks channel. So the CSV Handler Channel, I feel like the name is a little misleading because I think the coolest thing about it is your file doesn't have to be an actual CSV. Other delimiters can be used, such as spaces or semicolons. So this would be a place where you could use a CSV handler in place of, let's say, the Quickbase Sync or the Quickbase Connect. When you have a different delimiter in that file. So this channel allows you to accept incoming CSVs or incoming files with other delimiters. If you have another service that can possibly send a CSV like on demand or on a trigger or on a schedule, once you pull over that incoming CSV pipe or step, it's going to create a unique URL endpoint. And so that is what you would take that endpoint, take it to your external service and say, hey, every day at 1 p.m., send a CSV to this endpoint. You can also fetch a CSV, so you can schedule it yourself if your external system has an endpoint that you can go and grab that file from. So the CSV rows step is the next one, and this step allows you to actually iterate over the rows that are contained within your file. The cool thing, like I mentioned before, you can use Jinja to transform your data if you need to. If you have data that is all lowercase, you can capitalize the data with Jinja and kind of scrub your data before it makes its way into Quickbase. So if you think of each line is a data record, it's very similar to if you are doing a upload or an upsert into a Quickbase table from a regular CSV file. It's pretty much the same concept there. So you may be saying, but when exactly would I use it? And the answers there are if you need to fetch something on a schedule or you need to receive something on a schedule. I would say generally having that external source send over a CSV is a pretty awesome setup. And if your available file is separated by something other than commas, this is going to allow you to not have to scrub that file before you import it or upsert it into your Quickbase app. And then again, if you need to transform that data before sending it elsewhere, you might use the CSV handler to get data from another system, and then you might end up sending some of it into Quickbase and some of it into Salesforce. But you can change the data around if you need to do that before you send it elsewhere. So now we're going to hop on in and we are actually going to look at a demo of the CSV Handler. All right, so I threw together this very simple application. I did not make it available in the Exchange just because I thought it was almost too simple. But if there is enough interest, I can bundle it up with the YAML and everything and make that available to you if you kind of want to practice with these. So you can see we've just got 3 tables. We've got a CSV import, we've got our JSON and our webhook that we're going to look at in a little bit. So let's take a look at this particular pipeline. So we can see over here, these are our included channels that I mentioned, and we're going to look at the CSV handler. So we've got CSV sources, CSV rows. You can do the incoming, that's the one where it will create the unique endpoint for you. But what we're going to do here is we are actually going to fetch our CSV file. So we take a look at fetch. What I've actually done is I have a Dropbox file that I have made shareable. And what that means is I do not have to authenticate. But if you did, if you did need to authenticate to grab that CSV file, you would choose one of these methods up here. If you're grabbing it from Quickbase, obviously you can use your token. HTTP digest or basic are available. And my request method type is get because I am getting this file for me. One thing that I did want to point out that I found out while doing this demo was the shareable link that Dropbox in particular gives you is not a direct download link. The link that they actually give you is DL equals 0. But with some quick Google foo, I figured out that if you just change that DL equals 0 to DL equals 1, it changes that link to a direct download link. And you do need a direct download link. So we put our link in there. We don't need to supply any headers. We don't need a request body. Since I don't have any authentication to put in, I'm going to leave those all blank. So pretty simple. And then the next thing we're going to do is we are going to iterate over our CSV records. And this is where I am going to tell the pipeline, hey, this file has headers. My delimiter is a comma. You can see here we've got semicolons or tabs. And then I'm also going to enter my header columns here. And I need to enter them exactly as they are shown in the CSV file itself. Then I am going to tell it what field types these are. So in the case of like email, right? Obviously, we're not talking about Quickbase field types here, so you only have string, number, or integer. When in doubt, leave it as a string and it'll come over kind of as text. So if you're not sure, don't worry about that. And then I've got my for each loop that starts right here because what this is going to say is for each row that is present in the CSV file, what do you want me to do? And what I want it to do is create a record. And so I've chosen my account is the demo app we just saw, my table is CSV data, and then here is where I am going to actually map my fields. And so you can see here, this is a little bit of Jinja, you can tell by the double curly braces. And I just pulled my values over from step B. You can also type them if you don't want to drag them, that's totally cool too. Just make sure that they match. And so now we are going to run our pipeline and hope we're not having heavy traffic. So when I'm building pipelines, I also, I always like to sit here and watch this and kind of check my output just to make sure that A, there are no errors, and B, you know, what I think is going to happen is what is going to happen. So I also want to say a little aside, all of the data that you see here came from Mockaroo. None of it is real data. So please don't think that I'm sharing people's email addresses in this presentation. So I can see that it found 10 rows and then it found like 10 more rows. Okay. So it's finding all of our rows. I think I have 500 in all. And then we are creating our records here. And so I can see my input mapping, email, first name, ID, IP address, and then my outputs. And then we can actually come over here and hit refresh. And look, we have data that came out of our pipeline. So that came directly out of our CSV file stored on Dropbox. Next up, we have our JSON handler. A lot of people have kind of told me that the JSON handler is a little bit intimidating. You know, maybe they're just not familiar with JSON. It's very common. It's just JavaScript object notation is what it stands for. It's a little bit easier to parse than XML, at least in my opinion. And so it makes for a great payload. Our new RESTful API is JSON based, so there's a lot we can do with this JSON handler. It's actually one of my favorite channels. I find myself using it all the time because it's just so versatile. And it's really similar to the CSV Handler channel in the fact that you can have incoming JSON. So if you have an external system that can send a JSON payload over, when you use this step, it's going to generate that unique URL for you. The one I use the most is probably fetching JSON, where you retrieve a resource from a URL. If you're thinking to yourself, I don't really know what that means. I don't know how to fetch JSON. Well, I'm going to show you using the new Quickbase JSON API. And it's probably going to open like a whole new world for you if you haven't dabbled in the APIs yet. So I'm very excited. Just like CSV Handler, we have a JSON object step, which is going to iterate over the records or the objects within the JSON payload, and then it's going to do a thing. It's going to create a record. It's going to edit a record, kind of whatever it is you tell it to do. And when would you use the JSON handler? So, like I said, I use it all the time. It's fun to do, I think, and I think one of the coolest things that you can do with it, if you were at Empower last year, you might have attended my buddy Ryan Fletter's session on, I should have looked up the name before I started presenting this morning, but basically he had built an app that kind of helps you create an app library or a data dictionary of your applications and their fields and things like that. So with the new API, we allow you to query the schema and bring back schema information. So for instance, you can get all of the tables in an app, you can get all the fields in a table, information about those fields and things like that, which makes it super, super easy to build yourself a data dictionary and kind of, you know, keep an eye on schema bloat, for lack of a better term. I will say, as someone who has built these data dictionaries manually for so many years because the API calls didn't really exist, this is just like game changing when you want to keep track of everything. And maybe you have other builders and they're not in your group, so you don't really know what they're building. This can help you kind of keep a handle on that. The next reason is if you need to fetch data from an external JSON source. So there are tons and tons of open APIs out there. One of the things that I did recently was I helped one of our QSPs was trying to fetch API data from a travel website. And you may have seen I built a demo app and put it into the Exchange. And really what it does is it goes out to this external API and queries it every day to bring back the information. And it gives you a JSON payload. And obviously connected systems we don't have channels for yet. And not only we don't have the channels for, but maybe we don't have the steps within those channels, right? The perfect example is the Quickbase. In our Quickbase channel, we don't have a step for give me all the fields for this table. but the API does, so we can use our JSON handler for that. And finally, when you need to parse a JSON response, and this you might think is not very important, but after we talk about webhooks a little bit, because the JSON handler and the webhook channel at times can be used interchangeably, except when you need to parse that JSON response. So we are going to jump in and take a look. All right, so we are back into our Empower app on our JSON fields table. You can see right now it is empty. So we're going to take a look at the pipeline that's going to fill this. So you might notice it looks a little bit like our CSV handler. Oops, I'm going to close that because it was still running. You know, we've got A, we're fetching, B, we're iterating, we're looping, and then we're doing a thing. So it's the same thing with the JSON, and that will be over here. Obviously, these are alphabetical order. So you've got your sources where we can have it incoming to our unique URL, or we can fetch it from a source. And then our objects is where we're going to iterate over our payload. So let's check in here. So when I'm fetching JSON here, I do need to authenticate because I'm getting data from a Quickbase app. So one of the cool things we built in is you can just choose Quickbase user token. And it gives you this little token field. I do want to point out that your token is your credentials. Excuse me. This token in particular is in use only for this Empower app. It will be deactivated after this session is complete. So I'm not actually sharing anything of value with you. But if you are ever sharing your screen, you do want to obfuscate your tokens. If you're just sharing them with coworkers or things like that, because somebody could take your token and access Quickbase via the API. So you definitely want to guard tokens as if it's your password. I just wanted to call that out so nobody's like, oh my gosh, Bree's sharing a token. I know I'm sharing a token. I created that token for this purpose and only for this demo. So I've chosen my authentication schema. I put in my headers, QB Realm hostname. My hostname is demo.quickbase.com, so I just throw demo in there. I supply my token and my JSON URL. And you might be saying, Bree, I don't know where to get the JSON URL. That's okay, because I'm going to show you. So if you have not yet played with the Quickbase API portal, I want you to do so. I want you to go in here. We have this cool little portal on the right-hand side that lets you make calls in real time. So this is really what that Postman app that I mentioned earlier, it can help you do basically the same thing. So do know that when you make these calls, it's actually happening. So if you're editing a record or deleting a record, let's be sure that we're doing that in our builder accounts and not in our production realm, okay? So under fields over here, I've got get fields for a table, which is what we want to do. And there's some information here on, you know, what needs to be entered. Obviously, we've told you, hey, this is a required field, this is a required field, and this is as well. And you can see up here, some people kind of miss this initially, but we build the URL for you, and then we tell you what type of call it is. So this is a get call. I've got my URL right there built out of the parameters that I supplied. And if I want to send this, and this will be important in a minute, so take note, we've got our response that comes in, okay? And this is giving us all of our fields. So we'll jump back over here, and our next step is our iterate over JSON records, excuse me, where we are going to look at the objects that are returned, and then we're going to do a thing. What I want to point out to you is Pipelines expects you to provide a schema sample. And I've known people who are kind of like, I don't know what is going to be returned, and that is why this is very important. So if you can run this in our portal and you get a 200 response, which means everything's okay. And then you can copy all of this data here and throw it over into here. Now, I do want to point out that this data comes back surrounded by square braces. And then you have the curly braces that are around our individual objects. If I were to include the square brace, then Pipelines is going to say, that's not valid JSON. I'm not going to accept that. So sometimes what I like to do is just take my JSON and I can Google JSON validators. There's tons of free ones on the web, and just go in and validate that your JSON is good. So I've just included one object here, and we can see in here, this is field ID 6. The label is ID. We can see all the information that is returned by the API that I can get. So it's not my primary key. It's not a foreign key. I'm not allowing new choices, all that good stuff. Since this is just a single object and it's not actually within the data path, like a lot of JSON comes back, I can just leave this JSON records path blank. Now, for each of these objects that the JSON handler finds, excuse me, I want to create a record. So I'm creating my record in our JSON fields table. I've specified my fields, and I pulled over my values. Now, I want you to pay attention here. I am using a bit of Jinja to manipulate my data because this ID field can come over with a .0 behind it. And I don't want a .0 behind it, so I'm going to say, hey, Pipelines, this is an integer, just give me the number. So I put pipe int after it. And you might have learned that trick because it's the same thing with the Quickbase record IDs as it is with the field IDs. So we're going to run this real quick. I don't know about y'all, but it's always so satisfying when my pipeline runs and I can see this output and not red dots that tell me that I've made an error somewhere in my Jinja. I've noticed recently that a lot of people are kind of embarrassed if they're having issues with a pipeline and telling me like, oh, you're going to laugh at me, or oh, this was stupid. And it's not. Like, it's really not. Don't feel ashamed if you just can't get something to work. I've had things as simple as I missed a comma and I just needed another set of eyes to look at it. So don't ever be ashamed. Keep going until you get it right. Ask for help where you need it. Don't ever be embarrassed. So we've created our records, and I know I'm running out of time. So here we go. We have all of our fields from our CSV data table. All right, as I'm running out of time like I knew I would, we are going to jump back in and talk about webhooks really quickly. So webhooks are just a really kind of lightweight message, and it's similar to an SMS message. It's just really an automated call to a third party. One thing I've always wanted to build is an Alexa skill. I just really haven't gotten around to it yet. But hypothetically, you could use webhooks to command your Alexa, hey, add a new task to my task table in Quickbase. And that would basically be that webhook. So we have two categories. We've got requests and JSON requests. So this is where I kind of mentioned that the JSON Handler channel and the Webhooks channel, you can make API calls with both of them and return JSON payloads. The difference is you can't use the JSON parser to go through the objects that are returned. You would actually have to use Jinja for it. And the problem with that is that, and that was one of my favorite patterns for a while, but from talking to the pipelines engineers, the webhook is really designed for a 1 megabyte payload. It's not really designed to handle lots and lots of data. So it's not recommended that you use it for that, and that's exactly why the JSON Handler channel was created. But you can still do some cool stuff with webhooks. And I just want to point out that when you want to send data and consume the response of that data, I remember when Quickbase native webhooks, like on your tables, was introduced, and I was very excited until I realized I couldn't parse the response. And so I really had no way of knowing, because I was using it to send data to Salesforce, for example, but I had no idea if it, failed or something like that. I couldn't parse that response, so now you can. If you don't need to iterate over that response and do a thing for all the objects, you could use webhooks. Probably the coolest thing is you can manage your schema using the XML API. You can add users, you can remove users, you can change their roles. You can do all sorts of stuff with the XML API. And finally, one thing that I know a lot of people were worried about with automations going away is, how do I schedule my table-to-table imports? And it's your lucky day, because I'm going to show you how to do that right now. All right, we are back in our demo application, checking out our Webhook Import table. Now, what I've already done in preparation for this demo is I have set up a table-to-table import where I'm importing the data from the JSON fields table into the Webhook Import table. And for this, we are going to use our Webhook channel. And this is pretty cool because it's a one-step pipeline, right? Easy, so easy. And you might be thinking, oh my gosh, but Bree, it's the API and that's no longer low code. It is still low code, don't worry. You're not out here writing Apex or anything like that. Don't let it intimidate you. Take your app to the next level and automate things. So one cool thing to point out is the Webhook channel does allow for OAuth 2.0 authentication. The JSON Handler channel currently does not. So that's kind of another thing to keep in mind when you're deciding between those two channels. If you have to authenticate with OAuth, you're going to want to use the Webhooks channel. You can also use Basic and Digest if you want to authenticate in those ways. Now, you'll notice that they don't actually have the Quickbase token available for here. So I'm actually going to build it directly into my URL. And if you have not taken a look at the Quickbase API guide, this is our XML API. Again, this is how I learned APIs. I just came in here and just hammered away every single day trying things just to see what I could possibly do. Initially, when I looked at something like this, I was like, I don't know where to put that. Like, how do I do that? But the cool thing is our XML gives you this URL alternative. And this is really where I cut my teeth, because anybody can do this. You just copy this. You replace your target domain with whatever your domain name. So mine is demo.quickbase.com, and replace the target DB ID. I just grab that DB ID from my table. I do my run import, and then I change a little bit of this around where instead of an app token and a ticket, I'm actually using a user token. And it shows me what the sample response is. So I know what to expect when I run it in my pipeline. And so that is it. This is a post method. Again, we tell you that in here. And then content type, it's an XML API, so it's an XML content type. So we're going to run her. And we can see we made a request, and the output, we have a 0 error code. There are no errors, and 10 new webhook imports were created. All right, awesome. Go back and check out our table. There we go. Our import was successful. So you can use this webhook. I can schedule this to happen every night at 10 p.m., whatever time I want, or I can just run it manually. It's up to you. But This way you don't have to give up your table-to-table imports when automations go away. You can just convert them all over to this. And I'll be honest with you, like, it's super simple. Once you know how to break down each piece, you're going to understand it and you're going to feel awesome about it. All right, so let's come back in here and we'll do a little recap before we close out. You know, here at Quickbase, we're always trying to find new ways to put power in your hands. And whether that's for integrating with different systems or just making it easier to do your job, I think that we offer something for everyone and something for your builder journey, right? If you're building your first app right now, you should have no problem, you know, building that sync table. If you are building your 100th app, maybe you're going to take that deep dive into the API. But I would definitely recommend for all of you, if you don't have a free builder account, what are you waiting for? Go out there, play, become a better builder. You know, you are going to surprise your managers and your coworkers when you say, you know what, we need to get data from Salesforce into Quickbase. That's no problem. I can do that in an hour. I can build a pipeline. I can get what we want. And you're going to know how to do it. And you're going to really free up that data. I do want to point out that if you notice, I had the Quickbase API guides open. And that is because I use them probably on a daily basis. Even if it's just to level set on something that I think that I know, and I just want to do a little check and make sure that I am correct. Use the help documentation, read it, have it up all the time. I guarantee you, you're always going to get value from it. And don't be afraid, to say, I looked through the help docs and I couldn't find this. I am forever going to our technical documentation team, suggesting, new stuff for our help docs, because if there was something I didn't understand or something that I didn't find, we always welcome your input. So I hope that everyone had as good a time today as I did. If you have questions, we're hanging out in the chat here to answer those. If you have questions further on, you can find me on Slack. I believe, have a channel, Empower21 sessions questions. Just be sure you @Bree Mackey, or you can find me and send me a direct message. I'm always happy to engage with you and talk to you more about integrations and our new services offerings, where I can partner with you for your specific needs and your company's needs. So thank you. I hope you have a wonderful Empower, and I will see you all later.